Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha. If you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. By the way, I am losing my voice. I have filmed a lot this week. Lots of things coming up for you guys that I'm super excited about, so I'm trying my best. Forgive me, my voice is a little rough today, but here goes. Today's story has gotten to my head this week, and I am still trying to recover from the pure evil that I have learned about. So I cannot wait to dive into everything that I have uncovered, but before I do, I'd love for you to give me a moment to introduce you to our sponsor for today, and that is Liquid IV. Liquid IV is a great tasting electrolyte drink mix that's perfect for staying hydrated. And they're super convenient. All I have to do is pour one of these sticks into water and that's it. Drinking one Liquid IV hydration multiplier hydrates 2 times faster and more effectively than water alone. I've been drinking the hydration multiplier for about 2 years now, so I've had the chance to try a lot of the different flavors. And anytime I feel like I need some hydration, I go straight for Liquid IV, especially for me when I film these really long videos because I definitely need extra hydration. You may have seen Liquid IV hydration multiplier before, but this is one of their best-selling flavors, Concord Grape, and it's a must-have. It's powered by the science of cellular transport technology. It's specifically designed to enhance the rapid absorption of water and other key ingredients. Liquid IV is packed with 5 essential vitamins: B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C. I love how Liquid IV sticks are portable, easy to pack, and to use on the go. Now, with 14 refreshing flavors to choose from, there's something for everyone. So if you want to try the best-selling hydration multiplier flavors, go to liquidiv.com and use my code Kimber for 15% off plus free shipping, or find any of these amazing products at Costco. It's a great tasting way to hydrate. Now, let's get into today's case. I told you that this case really had an impact on me. When a family is involved in horrific circumstances, it always affects me to a more intense degree. And today's story involves the Andrew family, Mother Brenda, Father Robert, and their 2 children, Tricity and Parker. Before they became a family, the story begins with Brenda and Robert as individuals. So let me introduce you to Brenda Evers before she became Brenda Andrew. Brenda was born and raised in Enid, Oklahoma, to Donald and Rose May Evers. They were both devout Lutherans. Donald served in the U.S. Navy during the Korean War from 1953 to 1957, and then he married Rose in 1958 at Trinity Methodist Church. Enid, Oklahoma is in the Northwest. It's about an hour and a half away from Oklahoma City, and it's actually known as the wheat capital of the United States. I wouldn't necessarily call it a super small town like some of the other ones that I've talked about, because there was about 40,000 people living there at the time, but it was compared to other parts of Oklahoma, so I'm still going to give it that small town label, if you will. The Evers were a middle-class family. John worked at the Garfield County Courthouse, and Rose was working as an administrative assistant for a local lumber company called Long Bell Lumber Company of Enid. Rose decided to quit to become a stay-at-home mom when the Evers' first child, Kimberly Dawn, was born on September 16th, 1961. Just over 3 years later, Brenda was born on December 16th, 1963. The Evers also had a son, John Jay, who was sadly described by the family as severely mentally impaired. Both Kimberly and Brenda helped Rose with their brother John, and the Evers were unconditionally loving to those around them, in part because of how dedicated they were to their Lutheran faith, unwavering in their devotion to the church, helping others, holding regular prayer groups in their home, and gathering for family meals. Brenda was shy. She was cute, petite. She was a quiet little girl who was always meticulously and modestly dressed, with her clothing buttoned all the way up. She was dedicated to getting above average grades in school, attending church throughout the week, and spending most of her time helping care for her brother, John. People who knew the Evers described them as stepping right out of a 1950s sitcom. Brenda's close friend, Eileen Xander Littlefield, she would spend a lot of time with the Evers, and she too came from the same upbringing, the type of household that valued the image that they portrayed to everyone around them. But even Eileen noticed that Brenda was different from the other kids. She was not interested in talking about boys, but preferred to focus on playing the trumpet and doing well in school. She was one of the only friends in their friend group who got straight A's. Brenda respected her parents and followed in her mother's footsteps, acquiring skills in cooking and sewing, which really did not help to widen her social circle. Many of her friends thought that she was a little bit odd. However, Brenda was a good friend. She loved to help others. She was always the first one to offer her assistance, so it was easy to count on her. Brenda was part of the church choir, and she went to a Lutheran grade school. She was involved in a lot of youth group activities. The Evers sisters were members of Ongoing Ambassadors for Christ, which is an evangelism program for teens, and they also worked at a Lutheran summer camp. When she got into middle school, Brenda's mother allowed her to enroll in baton twirling class when she was in 7th grade. These classes were held at the Twirling Academy every Wednesday night at 6 p.m., and she was part of a twirling group of about 10 other girls her age. Brenda's mom let her do this because it was a safe and wholesome sport, and it let Brenda be a part of what the other kids her age were doing, like going to football games, without getting into trouble, because unlike everyone else, when the game was over, Brenda would go straight home. Even as she got older into high school, this remained her routine. She would go out to the football games, twirl her baton, or play trumpet in the band, but never go out to the parties with the other kids afterward. She didn't drink, and she never smoked or did anything like that. She was very conservative, and it was clear to everyone around her. She conformed to what her parents believed was expected of a young girl her age. It wasn't just that, though. Brenda was taught to be quiet and private because of her brother John's condition. It made Kimberly and Brenda strong individuals, but they were taught to be careful and guarded. I think there might have been a stigma of some kind about children who were different back then, which is actually very unfortunate and sad. Keeping up appearances could have been important to the Evers. Rose was involved in the Lutherans Women's Missionary League, as well as other Lutheran social and charitable groups that were associated with her church community. So I am sure that she had a reputation to uphold when it came to her family. In 1977, when Brenda was around 15, Rose went back to work as church secretary for Redeemer Lutheran Church. So not only was the Evers religion a part of their daily lives, but it was also part of Rose's work life and her career. It was when Brenda was a senior at Chisholm High School that she met Robert Andrew for the first time. In order to understand what drew these two together and how they became a couple, I have to introduce you to Robert. Robert Dale Andrew was also born and raised in Enid, Oklahoma. He was born September 19, 1962, to father Eugene Russell Andrew, who went by his initials ER, and his mother, Llewellyn Andrew. ER and Llewellyn had children back to back, except their youngest child, Tom, who came about 8 or 9 years after Robert. The first was Bill. Then a couple years later, you had Tim, followed by Robert, their third child, and later younger brother Tom. Robert grew up in a very wholesome family with strong family values. He had a happy childhood, but it wasn't without stumbling blocks. However, he could lean in on his older brothers and his family for support. They were a very close family. It's nice having siblings that are not too far apart in age because you can enjoy things together. But even Robert's younger brother, Tom, enjoyed skiing and hanging out with his older brothers. ER and Llewellyn raised their boys into fine gentlemen. However, when Robert was a child, he wasn't as athletically inclined as his older brothers. It was almost like his body was fighting against him. He was awkward, and he hid that with his humor and his creativity. The physical struggle began with his eyesight. This made sports somewhat of an issue. You can't keep your eye on the ball if one of your eyes wanders. That can be a problem. Depth perception was a real issue for Rob, so he ended up having to get glasses and do special eye exercises so he was able to gain control over that eye. I'm kind of surprised he wasn't offered some kind of surgery. Maybe back then, this was the route that doctors took because it was less risky. I'm not sure, but I've seen people who have had a wandering eye like that get surgery or have like a patch over one eye so they could build the strength. Over the years, struggling with this physical obstacle, Rob had built other qualities about himself, and these qualities would make him successful in his future. Short stories, telling jokes, and having his entire family laughing out loud at the dinner table. I think personality is so important. It's better to have this personality and be physically attractive than just be physically attractive alone. Or it can help if, you're not so fortunate in the looks department. It's a really good quality to have, to be funny and personable and be able to command a room. Robert actually attended the same high school as Brenda. However, he was a year older. So after graduating, he attended Oklahoma State University, and he was studying for a degree in advertising and marketing. It was while he was a student there that he met Brenda, who was still, like I said, a senior in high school at the time. Brenda knew Robert's younger brother, Thomas, and Brenda had grown up a lot since the last time I talked about her back when she was in middle school, twirling her baton and playing the trumpet. By this time, she was turning heads of every guy in her small town. But there was one guy that she kept asking Thomas about, his older brother, Robert. And Tom had to help his big bro out and let him know there's this really cute girl that comes to the community pool in town. He said, next time you're home, you two should meet. And they did. I would say it was love at first sight, but really, Robert was smitten by Brenda's beauty. He thought Brenda was absolutely stunning. He couldn't keep his eyes off of her. Rob would later tell friends that he was at the community pool during the summer. He looked over and saw Brenda in her swimsuit, and she looked so good that he couldn't help but approach her. Brenda was only 19 at the time. Rob lived about an hour and a half away because he was attending Oklahoma State, but they did start seeing each other, and eventually they do become exclusive. After graduating high school, Brenda moved away to attend St. John's Lutheran College in Winfield, Kansas. But a year later, she transferred to Oklahoma State University to be closer to Rob. He was serious about his studies and spent his time working on various school projects. Rob wrote for the university newspaper, the Oak Collegian, and he was also actively involved in OSU's advertising club. In 1984, Robert graduated with a degree in advertising and marketing, and that same year, he proposed to Brenda, and of course, she said yes. Robert had a similar wholesome upbringing as Brenda. He was intelligent, funny, good-looking, and he just graduated with a degree. He was planning to go into a lucrative advertising career. It was all the qualities that someone like Brenda was looking for, and a guy that she knew her parents would approve of. Besides, they were inseparable. They seemed to be the perfect couple, especially based on the way that they both grew up and their belief systems. Brenda just really thought that Rob was husband material, someone that she could start a family with. So after they both graduated, they lived in Oklahoma City and got married June 2nd, 1984. Brenda was interested in a career in finance, while Rob was actively looking to break into the advertising industry. He was offered a job at an advertising company in Texas, so he and Brenda relocated there. And Brenda ends up landing a job that she really likes. Things are going well for the couple. Rob is excelling at work. Brenda has made some really solid friendships in town, and she loves life away from the Bible Belt, and she was living in a place with a good old Southern hospitality. It was a nice change for her. It was exciting. It enabled her to be her own person aside from her family. And I've experienced this. I don't know if you have, but you become your own person when you step away from your parents, especially if you have parents like Brenda who kind of, kept her in her own little shell, in her own little bubble. Because back in her hometown, everyone knew her, and they probably expected her to act a certain way and be a certain way because of her past and her upbringing. But as an adult, getting away and being on your own, to become your own version of yourself, it can be very empowering. It was as though Brenda was really coming into her own and feeling independent. Brenda and Rob were about to go through their first struggle as a couple. It wasn't something they couldn't figure out. Why I mention this is because many times when we see shows about cases or we read about them, we only hear about the good things. And I think we all know that no relationship is perfect. Let me explain. Just as they were putting roots down in Texas for the last couple years, Rob admits to Brenda that he missed being back home. He dreamed of working for a very prominent advertising firm back in Oklahoma City called Jordan Advertising Associates. Their client list included his alumni, Oklahoma State, as well as energy giant ONEOK. The position he wanted was a high-paying one with a lot of room to grow, but Brenda wasn't thrilled. She was happy. She was content. She was growing. However, Rob, he wasn't even offered this position yet. He would call her regularly to talk to the president and CEO, Jeanette Gamba, to ask whether or not there were any openings, but no such luck. However, Brenda knew that it would be a possibility, and she wasn't exactly hoping it would happen. But it did happen. In 1988, after 2 years of checking in with Jeanette, she finally informed Rob that they had a position to offer to him. It was an exciting time. This was his dream. He had worked so hard to get here, and it was all coming together, except it wasn't. Brenda couldn't leave. Instead of making it into more of an issue, they made a compromise. Rob didn't even know if he was going to like this job or if he was going to like being back in Oklahoma. So Brenda would stay in Texas while Rob moved back to Oklahoma until he knew for sure that this is what he wanted and that this was what was best for the couple. So the pair lived apart for a few months until Rob made the decision to stay at Jordan. He relayed all the positives to Brenda, which included being close to their families, and they planned to start their own. So it made sense for them to move back, and Brenda agreed. It was hard for people to disagree with Rob. He was always so good at making sense of things. There was something so extraordinary about Rob, and it's what drew people to him and made them love him and respect him. It wasn't just hard work, intelligence, his sense of humor. It was the principles that drove him to be who he was. Getting to know Rob and his family through this research I did changed me as a person because it taught me something that he shared with so many others any chance he got: hope and persistence. It sounds ordinary, but what made these lessons unique was where they came from for Rob. 2 books that he kept in his desk drawer at his office. You may be familiar with one or both of them. The first one I remember from my childhood, Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham. This is what I thought made Rob unique and taught me something that I had not heard before. Rob considered it to be the best business book in the world because by the end of the book, he persuades a gourmet chef to sample green eggs and ham and eventually like it. This book taught Rob the value of persistence. The other book was the Bible, which he studied every morning before work. He even kept a prayer journal, and he would use it as a place to record his thoughts, Bible scriptures, and his intentions and interpretations of how these things related to his life. This is what instilled the message of hope in Rob. But his devotion to God and picking up his Bible again the way he was, that didn't happen until later, and you'll find out why in just a moment. After settling back down in Oklahoma City, Brenda landed a job at Bank of Oklahoma, and she rose up through the ranks and became a personal banker. Brenda wasn't just beautiful. She was intelligent, hardworking, and she enjoyed being social with her coworkers, and she made a number of close friends at the bank. A lot of times her and Rob, they would go out on double dates with other couples, and Brenda had gained a lot of confidence over the years. She had come out of her shell, and maybe it was because of Rob's outgoing personality and it rubbed off on her, but she was not the shy little girl with the clothes all buttoned up here to her neck. She had blossomed into a very gorgeous, kind, fun to be around, sexy woman. She stood out in a crowd. There was something about Brenda, a twinkle in her eye or her big, perfect, pearly smile. She had charisma. She looked like the girl next door, but all grown up, and Rob considered himself so lucky, and he really was because he had everything he had always wished for. And just like Brenda, Rob loved his job. It was his dream job. Rob came to work every morning with gratefulness in his heart. He was always the first one to get to his office. He was extremely friendly and outgoing and very creative. The traits that I told you he cultivated growing up that would serve him well in his future. Robert was always cracking jokes and making people smile. He had the best laugh. It was that infectious laugh, the type that it's nearly impossible to hold back your own laugh. And Rob even did things like bringing a bunch of Slurpees to work for everyone because he decided July 11th would be 7-Eleven Day. I love Slurpees. I'm from South Florida. I used to walk to my local 7-Eleven back in Fort Lauderdale as a kid, and I would get Slurpees with my friends. Now, I don't want to tell you what we used to do because it was illegal, but let's just say we would, I'll just tell you. We used to put candy inside the cup and then fill it up with a Slurpee and then only pay like $1. I'm a terrible child. I need a slap on the wrist. Now I'm craving a Slurpee. Many people Rob worked for saw him as a mentor. He was always coming up with really cool ideas. He would rush into the office and scribble something down on a piece of paper, and then he would tape them onto the walls and look at them and come up with an advertising plan. He made work fun, and clients loved him. He would take potential clients out for drinks and dinner, ultimately winning them over with his personality and his creativity. And over the years, this would elevate him to Senior Vice President of Jordan Associates. But before that, there was another life-changing event that occurred. On December 23rd, 1990, after 6 years of marriage, Brenda and Rob welcomed their first child into this world. Now, Rob chose her name, and it's a unique one. I had to practice it a few times because I never actually heard it be used as a name before. Her name is Tricity. Yes, not Trinity, one letter difference, Tricity. He thought it would be cool if one day his daughter were to run for public office and she made signs that said electricity. Yes, it's true. There's Rob's dad humor for you, but it stuck. It is pretty cool if you ask me. Like, I have a unique name myself, and I'm sure many people had trouble pronouncing her name, considering it also looks like Tri-City in reference to like the Tri-City area in different states. But no matter what they named her, Tricity was an absolute joy to the Andrew family. Brenda loved children. After all, she did spend most of her time during her childhood caring for her brother. It was in her blood. It was who she was. Brenda's sister Kim became a nurse, probably for the same reason. The Andrews were a family now, and Rob was a natural family man, having grown up with 3 brothers of his own. Brenda and Rob were active in their community and the church that they attended. It was called Village Baptist Church. Brenda would even help out with the Sunday school classes. After Tricity was born, Brenda quit her job and became a stay-at-home mom. It might have been the fact that both Rob and Brenda's mom did the same. They were very attentive to their children, that Brenda felt the pressure to follow in their footsteps and stay at home with her child as well. She could have thought that this would give her the best life possible. Plus, financially, Rob was in the position to support their entire family on his own and give them a very comfortable lifestyle, including the ability to purchase a home in an upscale suburban neighborhood of Landsbrook in Oklahoma City. According to landsbrook.org, it's a welcoming, family-friendly neighborhood with a lot of charm. In addition to a lake, it has 4 parks with playgrounds, walking trails, a large pool, a tennis court, and security. There are several social events a week to ensure continued development of new friendships and pride in the neighborhood. It was the perfect place for the Andrew family to grow. It was beautiful. It had lots of kids having fun at the community pool, barbecues and events at the clubhouse, smiling children at those parks I just talked about, and it was a great way for moms who were at home with their children to socialize, and that's exactly what Brenda did. It's an estate that consists of 180 acres, around 400 single-family homes, duplexes, and beautiful landscaping. The Andrew home had 3 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, and it was close to 4,000 square feet on a 6,050 square foot lot. If you've been here before, you know that I'm probably going to find pictures, and here they are. It's got a 2-car garage, a nice, big, beautiful front yard. I love the little stone walkway that goes from the driveway to the front door. Hardwood floors, a beautiful fireplace in the sitting room, nice big kitchen for family meals, and it's also a multi-level home. It has a big deck out in the back. It's perfect for entertaining guests, barbecuing, kids running around and having a good time playing together, and the rooms were very spacious. Look at the yard, though. This really is what people dream about, the American dream, and the Andrew family were living it. It just hurts me to think that they've worked so hard to get here, because I'm sure you realize we wouldn't be talking about this family if something terrible hadn't happened to them. Brenda traded in her 9-to-5 for change in diapers, bouncing her little bundle of joy on her knee, socializing with other moms at the park, grocery shopping, and putting those little home economics skills that she learned in high school to practice. She definitely was following in her mother's footsteps with cooking and sewing and being a full-time mom and wife. She was good at it too. She was devoted to her role. She would have delicious dinners made and ready for Rob as soon as he came through that door every evening from work. Rob worked a lot because he wanted to provide everything he could for his growing family. And it was growing because 4 years after Tricity was born, they welcomed a son, Parker Bryce. Now the Andrew family was really complete. And we are back where I started with the story, with the family of 4, Brenda, Rob, Tricity, and Parker. This is how they became the Andrew family. Brenda went from small town girl to basically a super mom. She did it all. She was at the Girl Scout meetings, she was at the bake sale fundraisers for the neighborhood, teaching the Sunday school classes, attending church regularly, maintaining a social life at her church with her church friends, in the neighborhood with the neighborhood friends, and even at Rob's work functions with his work friends and colleagues and their wives. They had a good balance. Rob was dedicating his time to making sure the family had everything they needed financially, and Brenda was making sure that the household ran smoothly, that their children were in school and involved in their sports and their music and extracurricular activities. They were just a happy couple, a happy family. However, happy or not, I told you nobody's relationship is perfect. And recall how I mentioned there was a time where Rob started to pick up his Bible more, even though they were already attending church. And Rob was doing a lot as far as bringing in the salary that afforded his family this amazing home in this upscale neighborhood, nice cars, the essentials. He still felt like he wasn't doing enough for Brenda. He loved her so much. And there was nothing he wouldn't do to make sure that she had everything she needed to be happy. And nobody said she wasn't happy, but Rob just kind of thought that they weren't as close as they were before and as close as he wanted them to be. But that's to be expected. In a lot of relationships, this is what happens when people become busy. Sometimes they don't have the same connection as they once did when they were dating, when things were fun and exciting because you add children into the mix, friends, work, lots of new responsibilities. That kind of thing can make things a little dull, monotonous. And not only that, sometimes when you're working very long hours, day in and day out, week after week, year after year, you can let your youthful physique go. You're sitting at a desk, you're entertaining clients, you're going out for dinners all the time and time again. Well, that was what Rob was doing while Brenda, she was active. She was at the pool, she was at the park, playing with the kids, and I told you she blossomed into a very stunning woman. Rob was so proud to have her on his arm. She was the complete package. Some would probably refer to her as the trophy wife. And I have to mention, Brenda traded in her turtlenecks for definitely more revealing, mature adult clothing. And if Rob thought she was hot at 19, he thought she was even more gorgeous at 30. But Rob wasn't the only one who noticed his wife. Yes, there were comments. She didn't look like the other wives that came to the work events. Many of the women were considered to dress frumpy or conservative, but not Brenda. She was different. She had enough of wearing modest outfits in her past. She was a grown woman who made her own rules, and good for her. That's the thing, though. She also looked a lot younger for her age. She was 30, and sometimes people would look and pause because of what she was wearing, because she looked 10 years younger. She could still pass for 20, even though she was 30. And Rob kind of felt like he needed to keep up. We've all been there, one way or another. Even if it's not in a relationship, it could be trying to keep up a certain caliber at your job or being at a different place in our lives than someone else. It can put a lot of stress on someone. And Rob just didn't feel like he was good enough. He started to confide in his friends and his family, and he told them, I want to have a stronger bond with my wife. So they gave him the advice to go seek out counseling from a pastor at their church and lean into God. And in doing so, it renewed or revived Rob's faith, and it became more powerful than ever. He went from going out drinking with his clients to praying over them and listening to what God wanted when it came to everything that was important to him. So whether it was the fact that he threw himself into this religious aspect of his life and kind of forgot about anything he thought was wrong, or if it really did help to strengthen their marriage, either way, Rob became a fixture at the local church. And over the years, people watched him grow in his faith and become a mentor to others. He was very respected. There were other men who wanted what Rob had with his family, his career, his finances, and his spirituality. He was looked at as a very devoted Christian. And over the next few years, many people began going to Rob for advice. They knew that he would always give them a positive attitude and open and honest answers. That's why the elders in the church actually looked toward Rob. It was 1997 when something happened with a fellow church, and they were in need. They needed advice. Their pastor had resigned, just left, and it was a big deal because they lost the leader of their entire church, and they did not know what to do. Rob stepped up because he felt like this was part of his mission, to come up with a plan. That's what he did for work. He would come up with a plan, and even though it was advertising and marketing, it was still kind of the same thing. They had to advertise and market this church to have a new pastor want to come and be the leader. He and other members from the church got together and they prayed. They would have regular prayer meetings trying to find out what God wanted them to do for the future of this church. And finally, Rob and a few others with the means to do so came up with a plan. They decided that their church would sponsor a new church for the one that lost their pastor. And Rob was pivotal in this coming together. He founded this new church. It was called North Point Baptist Church, and he also became a deacon there. Now Rob, Brenda, and their children were even more of a fixture at North Point Baptist Church because they started to attend that one instead of Village Baptist. All eyes were on them, but mostly Brenda, because they didn't think she was dressing appropriately. And this was an ongoing situation, and Brenda did not seem to care. It's not as though they were going to kick her out of a church that her husband founded, right? And after all, aren't Christians supposed to be accepting? I don't know. I'm not sure. But they weren't accepting of her at this point. And despite the complaints, Brenda continued to wear what she wanted and teach her 5th grade Sunday school class every week. And Rob continued to fulfill his role as deacon for North Point Baptist. He even did missionary work in South America, and he remained devoted to his family and smitten with Brenda. In 1999, Brenda's mom, Rose, retired so that she could spend time with her husband of 42 years and their grandchildren. Both Brenda and Rob's parents and families were very involved in their children's lives. Brenda's sister, Kimbyrleigha, and Rob's 3 brothers would regularly get together for holidays and birthdays, and Kimbyrleigha would come to Parker and Tricity's sporting events. She also loved to take them to Winchell's Donut House every Saturday for donuts. That sounds yummy. Brenda had always been close with her sister, so it's no surprise that her sister was a huge part of her children's lives. Rob's dad, he was in real estate. It was a family business. It's called Andrew Real Estate, and Rob's dad served as the real estate commissioner, and his brother Tom served as District 1 vice president and had been on the local community board of realtors for a long time. Both families doted on their grandchildren, and they had the means to do so. They were also trying to instill the same values in them that they instilled in Brenda and Rob. They just had no idea that on Rob's 39th birthday party, September 19, 2001, it would be the very last time that family had an ordinary celebration together. Their lives were about to change forever. Over the years, other significant changes had already occurred. One was the heartbreaking death of Brenda's father, September 16, 2000, the day of Brenda's sister's birthday. How sad is it if your father were to die on your birthday? It's a day that you usually celebrate happiness and life. And now it was a yearly reminder that their father was no longer with them. These are the times that families come together. Kim and her husband Jim were close with Brenda. They had 5 kids of their own, and this was the first parent that had passed away, so it changed things. A year later, in November 2001, the families were gearing up for the Thanksgiving holiday, which fell on November 22nd that year. But just 2 days before they had a chance to come together for food and fun, time would stand still. Another tragedy would occur. On the evening of November 20th, a 911 call comes in to Oklahoma City Police Department, reporting what sounds like shots fired in the quiet Landsbrook neighborhood. Shortly after that, another 911 call comes in from 6212 Shaftesbury Road, the address of Brenda and Rob Andrew. The woman's voice on the other end, she's frantic. You could hardly understand what she was saying. She couldn't even catch her breath. Something terrible happened. It's Brenda, and she's been shot. She's finally managed to get to the phone to call 911, and she is desperately trying to explain to the 911 operator that someone came into her home and fired shots at both her and her husband, Rob. The operator is trying to understand what's going on, but Brenda's hyperventilating. She tells them, "I've been shot. My husband has been shot." When they ask her who shot them, she says she doesn't know, but she needs help, that there's blood everywhere, that her arm is stinging, and she's been shot, and she's hurt. She makes her way back to the garage, where Rob is lying on the ground. And the operator asked if he's still breathing, and she says, yes, he's still breathing, and he's trying to talk. The operator told her that help would be on the way. They sent EMTs and police out to the Andrew home, and they arrive within minutes. When they get on the scene, the garage door is open, and they can see Brenda kneeling on the ground beside Rob, who's lying face up on the garage floor near the door that leads into the home. They can tell that both Brenda and Rob are injured. The EMTs begin to render aid to both of the victims. This just doesn't happen in this neighborhood. It's a quiet community. They don't hear about violence, let alone something like this to a family like this. As emergency personnel got closer to Rob, they noticed that he's clutching a trash bag against his body in front of him. And he is not breathing. He's lying there lifeless in a pool of blood. It's obvious upon closer inspection that he has 2 gun wounds, one to the side of his neck and one in his stomach. Sadly, at this point, there was nothing that they could do for Rob, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. Brenda is also hurt. She's shot in the upper part of her left arm, and she's being transferred to the hospital for treatment. Police are trying to ask her as many questions as they can to find out who did this. And she's giving them as much information as possible, but she's in a terrifying situation, and she's in shock. And who wouldn't be at this point? You've just witnessed your husband being murdered, and someone attempted to murder you too. All she can remember is that 2 men, she believes they're men, in dark clothing with ski masks entered her garage while her and Rob were inside. She said they started shooting and then they fled on foot. Now the police are concerned about the neighborhood, for the community. These people could be anywhere at this point. So they put a helicopter in the sky and they decided to canvass the neighborhood. They were going door to door on foot, and they were also patrolling in vehicles to see if they could locate anyone with that description. Meanwhile, other officers that have arrived on the scene are doing a sweep of the house. This is a 3-level home. They had to make their way from the garage up to the other bedrooms and ultimately to the master bedroom where they can hear the TV is on. With their guns drawn, they enter that bedroom, and that's when they find both of the children, 11-year-old Tricity and 7-year-old Parker. Both of them were watching TV unharmed, thank goodness. They're taken out of the house and over to a neighbor's home until the scene is cleared. But these poor children, they have no idea what has just happened to their parents at this point. And I honestly cannot imagine, and they're just so lucky. And so is Brenda. They're lucky to be alive, but she's not without injury. She's been rushed to the hospital to treat the bullet wound. And luckily, it hadn't hit any major arteries. It was a through and through wound, so the bullet wasn't lodged inside. However, she does need to stay in the hospital overnight to make sure that everything is okay. Detectives are eager to get information from her, but they know that she needs to relax because she's going to be told that her husband is deceased. The coroner is called out, and the death investigation technicians remove Rob from the scene so that the crime scene techs can begin to collect evidence. The first thing they notice is the black trash bag that Rob is clutching in his hands. They remove it from his grasp, and they see that it's full of empty soda cans. The impression that they got was that either he used this as a shield or he was in the middle of taking out the trash when he was wounded. I want to tell you the significant findings from the scene at the home. There was a .22 caliber bullet found stuck in one of the walls of the garage. A 16 gauge shotgun shell is found on top of Brenda's maroon minivan that was parked inside the garage. Rob's black Nissan is parked outside in front of the garage, and there are no signs of forced entry on any of the doors or windows in the portions of the home. It's likely that these perpetrators came through the open garage door from the driveway area. Rob's wallet was still in his pocket, and as a matter of fact, some of the pellets from the shotgun went through portions of his wallet. None of the Andrews' valuables have been removed. Nothing has been taken. No cars have been stolen. But there is no way to know that there wasn't cash, let's say, stashed in the home or something like that. So at this point, they're categorizing this as a home invasion. They just don't know why somebody would target the Andrew family. They did have money. Plus, they were one of the only families that were home during the Thanksgiving holiday, which is a big time for crime. Black Friday is usually one of the biggest days for hits like this. Lots of Christmas presents would be inside before Christmas morning. Shopping is going on. People are out of town. So perhaps the person who did this thought the Andrews would be gone. And once that garage door opened and they realized that Brenda and Rob were inside, things went awry. What they can gather from the evidence is that Rob has been shot in 2 different places on his body, his neck and his stomach. The wounds indicate the 16-gauge shotgun was the weapon used, and a .22 was used on Brenda. All of this is about to add up, because even though Brenda had lost a significant amount of blood, she's coherent, and she has requested to be brought down to Oklahoma City Police Headquarters to provide details that she can remember from the attack. Meanwhile, police are going door to door. They notice that many people are out of town for Thanksgiving. It's very quiet in this neighborhood at the time. 2 neighbors heard something that night, Lisa Kistler and Carol Shadid. Lisa said she heard a loud noise, like 3 shotgun blasts, and Carol said she heard someone scream. The police search by car around the vicinity turns up nothing, and this was not much for detectives to go on. Even though doctors wanted Brenda to rest, she was adamant about going down to the police station and telling them everything right away. She did not want to wait a second. She didn't want to forget anything. While everything is fresh in her mind, she wants to get down there. She is literally still in her hospital gown. And when she's talking to investigators, she explains that her and her husband were in the garage and he was working on relighting the pilot light on the furnace because it had gone out again. As they're working on it, 2 people walk through that open garage door out of nowhere, and without warning, they come towards them, and the next thing she knows, she's hearing a shot ring out. Everything's happening really fast. She can't tell exactly what's going on, but at that point, she's in shock. She runs towards the inner part of the house through that door because her children are in there. And while she's running that way, she hears a second shot followed by a third shot. And then she noticed something happened to her arm. So she runs to grab the phone and dials 911. And then she runs up to the master bedroom to make sure the children are okay. All the while, she's explaining what's happening to the 911 operator. She says she saw 2 people. She thinks they were men wearing all black and ski masks covering their face. She goes back down to the garage, and when she's on the phone with 911, she's checking on Rob. And everything else has already been recorded for police. This is good information, but unfortunately, it's not enough for them to go on. Which makes sense because criminals don't exactly try to expose their identity when they're committing crimes. But since nothing's taken, they're wondering why else someone would target the Andrew family. And Brenda explains this isn't the first time that their home had been targeted. She had talked to the police probably around 3 months ago about someone who had possibly tried to burglarize their home. They asked her the typical questions that they ask everyone. Were there any enemies that your family had? She says she doesn't think so, but she doesn't know everything about what Rob does. He goes away a lot. He's on business trips. He knows a lot more people than she does, but that they're both involved in their community and in their church. They definitely don't have any volatile situations with anyone in their lives. So she has no idea. And she's also obviously still in shock and distraught. But most of all, she wants to know where her children are. The police are still questioning her, and they ask, did the men say anything? She said she did hear them say something to Rob, but she couldn't make out what it was. She didn't recognize their voices. And so far, everything that investigators know about what they found at the crime scene matches what Brenda is telling them. They now believe there are 2 shooters, considering there are 2 calibers of weapons used in this crime. And you probably know what I'm going to say next. They need to fan out and find people who knew the Andrew family, specifically Rob, since it appears that he is probably the initial target. They need to know what his lifestyle really was like, because I'm sure you know by now from watching these types of videos, looks can be very deceiving. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what kind of business dealings are going on. It doesn't matter if someone goes to church. That could be a front. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make them a good person just because they're involved in their church or their community. So it is imperative that they go to Rob's work and his church and anywhere else that they could locate anyone that could give them information about whether they knew someone who would want to harm Rob or his family. And they're doing the same thing in regard to Brenda. They interview Brenda's friends and family as well. Luckily, the couple does share a lot of the same friends in their friend group, since most of the time, Brenda hangs out with the wives of Rob's friends. So they get on this as fast as possible. And the word is traveling rapidly as per usual, especially in a quiet neighborhood like this one. And the news is out there. The media is all over it. And the families who were out of town for the holiday, they're freaking out because they don't know what's been going on since they've been gone. They don't know if they're going to come back to homes that are completely emptied out. The police, it's not their job to go over there and check each one of these homes to see if they've been burglarized. And for all they know, while they've been searching for these perpetrators, they could have been going inside other people's homes, taking out thousands of dollars worth of merchandise and gifts. It's putting a lot of concern and anxiety on the residents of this community. When Brenda and Rob's next door neighbors, Judy and Dean Gigstad, hear what happened in town, they cannot believe it. Who could? You're not expecting to turn on the TV and see your neighborhood on the news with the word that your neighbor has been murdered. A family that you know, a family you've spent time with, that you're close with. So Judy calls Brenda right away. She wants to know what is going on, and she doesn't answer at first. But finally, she does get in touch with Brenda. She can hardly keep it together. She's crying on the phone. She's asking, when is Judy going to get back? She knows that Brenda needs all the support she can get. So they plan to cut their vacation short and be back in a few days. And they're eager to get back home because they want to find out if anything happened to their house and their belongings. Not to mention the fact that Brenda was planning the holidays and now she has to plan her husband's funeral. Of course, she's going to have the support of her family, her sister, her sister's husband, Jim, and the police are already notifying Rob's family, his brothers, Bill, Tim, and Tom, and his mom, Llewellyn, and Father Yar. They're all finding out about the tragedy at this point. And of course, as you can possibly imagine, it's a heartbreaking time for these families. Rob is so loved by his brothers, by his mom and dad, and something like this can rip apart a family. But they're strong in their faith, and the most important thing at this moment for them is to be there for Brenda and the children, because the families are taking care of one another. And the investigators have a job to do as well, helping this family find out who did this. 5 days go by, and in those 5 days, a lot of interviews and calls were conducted. I'm going to tell you all the different information that came out about the Andrew family. But before I do, something really significant happened when Judy and Dean come home from their trip. This is when they get a big break, in this case, for the very first time. Obviously, because they weren't home, they're not witnesses or anything like that. But let me show you where Dean and Judy's house is in relation to the Andrew home. It's right here. To the left, if you're looking toward their house, I want you to take a look at the fact that one of the rooms overlooks the deck that's located on the side of Brenda and Rob's home. You can see the deck here from the overhead view. If you look at these two homes side by side, they're very close together. Their homes are basically separated by just a fence. Judy and Dean's home has 4 bedrooms. So Judy goes into the master and she's unpacking her suitcase. She's putting her clothes away and her shoes away. And she opens her closet door and she notices something. Right away, she's scared because there's something that's not right. She used to have a little shoe rack and it was gone. Why would a shoe rack be gone? All the shoes were still there. They were just placed on the floor where the shoe rack used to be. That's weird. That's odd. And she doesn't want to be too alarmed or anything because one of her sons, Jeff, did stop by the home before heading out to meet them for Thanksgiving holiday out of town. But as she's looking around throughout the room, she looks over and her bed is lopsided. It's like tilted to one side. Something is not right. Something's off. So she kneels down and gets on the floor and she starts to look underneath. And that's when she finds a shoe rack. So she pulls it out from underneath the bed. As you can see, it's clearly broken. It looks like someone stuffed it under the bed to hide it. What is going on here? And Judy moves to the next room, which is the bedroom that overlooks Brenda and Rob's deck, the one I showed you right here. While she's in that room, she immediately notices that the closet door is wide open and she knows she would not have left it open. So once again, she's thinking, okay, maybe her son Jeff, who was supposed to come by and get a few things, that he left it open. She looks down, and sitting on the ground in front of the closet door is a 16-gauge shotgun shell, and that's definitely not normal. That is not her shotgun shell. Now they know someone has been inside their home, and that is terrifying. When Dean looks at the shotgun shell, he says it looks like it has been ejected from a gun. Well, that's concerning, because the only person that comes to mind that had access to their home was their son Jeff. They call him up, and at this point they're thinking, could he have had something to do with that crime? And they're just trying to come up with all kinds of theories at this point. They have no idea what's going on. So Jeff would come over from time to time. He doesn't have to tell them he is, but he would come to borrow things. And they asked him, okay, so you've been inside the house. Were you in these rooms when you came over? Because supposedly he stopped there for a playpen for his kid before he met them on their trip. He tells his mom, I was there, but no, I didn't even go in your bedroom. I didn't break your shoe rack. I only went in the guest bedroom to get the playpen. And then I left. But the room he's talking about was the room with the closet door open and the shotgun shell. It was sitting on its brass rod. I'm going to show it to you right here. This is the way it looks. Because it's a 16 gauge, it's one that's not the most common. You usually see a 12 gauge or even a 20 gauge. But a 16 gauge, it's not as common. And Dean had remembered when he was listening to the TV that Rob was shot with a 16 gauge shotgun. So they immediately call the police. Now an investigation begins at the Gigstad's house. The investigators get into the closet where the shoe rack was, and they guess it was probably used to get into the attic. Because when they look up, they notice that the access point to the attic has been slid open. And they figure out that someone has climbed into that attic and they stepped on that shoe rack and it didn't hold their weight and it broke. So they probably just stuffed it under the bed because they wanted to maybe buy some time in case someone came home. Maybe they wouldn't notice, but of course they did. So that attic crawl space cover was opened and they went up there and they found bullets inside. And these were unused bullets from a .22 caliber. If you remember this, that was the caliber used that caused Brenda the injury to her arm. In this attic, there's a small window, and guess where that window looks out to? Directly to the Andrews' home. So, of course, investigators are now theorizing that the killers were inside the Gigstad's home planning this ambush on this family. But who is the killer? Well, Judy has to admit to the investigators that their son Jeff was inside on the day the murder took place. He had the key to their home, which was relevant because there were no signs of forced entry at their residence. Because Jeff was the last known person inside their residence and he had access with a key, they have to question him because he is now on the top of the potential suspects list. He explains he wasn't there on the day of the murders. He was there the day after the murders, in the morning. And he wants to be clear and he wants to make sure they understand that this is the truth. Jeff's alibi is that 1, he was never at the residence on the day of the murder, so he couldn't have done anything wrong. But 2, he could prove it. He was there to check on his parents' house, collect their mail, and get the playpen to take on the trip to Kansas for the holiday. When he was on his way out the door, he noticed there were messages that were not listened to yet on the answering machine. He pressed play and listened to a couple of the messages. They were from friends of the family, and they were asking if everybody was okay because they just heard the news about the murders. The answering machine has a record of when the messages were played. And the messages were played the day after the murders, just like Jeff said. Jeff was the Gigset's adult son. He was married with children, and he said he was home with his wife when he found out about the murders. They asked him if he had any weapons, and he does. He has a shotgun. So they definitely need to take a look. But they realized right away it's a 12 gauge, not a 16 like the one that killed Rob. This, coupled with the fact that he had an alibi and no motive that they could think of to want to hurt this family, they had to move on to other suspects. But after speaking with Jeff and doing ballistics, the test confirmed that the ammo was from the same weapon used on the Andrews. So the investigators put together a theory of how they think the killers carried out this crime. They believe that after those shots were fired, the perpetrators ran. It would only take seconds to get to the next door neighbor's home and hide inside. So they believe the perpetrators slept there overnight. And that is such a nasty, gross feeling, an invasion of privacy, thinking that these people were in your home. But there's something even crazier. They believe that the reason why the shoe rack is broken and the attic was even gone into, and I initially thought it was because that's where they shot from or something. I don't know. I was kind of confused when I first heard this. But then when I figured it out, I was like, oh my God, that makes sense. The perpetrators were in that home and they heard Jeff come into the house. So they ran to hide in the guest closet. And they cocked the shotgun because they were getting ready in case Jeff opened the door and they were found. That's why that shell casing was on the floor. And that's terrifying. When Judy heard this, she was in tears. She couldn't believe that her son could have been killed. So the next place they go after this, after clearing Jeff, is the North Point Baptist Church. The Andrew family had many friends at this church, and the investigators want to talk to the closest friends first. So they meet with a woman named Shannon James. She tells investigators she met Rob when they were on a missions trip together in Brazil. And when he told her that he did advertising and marketing, she just lit up. She was so excited. And she told him that was her dream job. She always wanted to be in advertising her whole life. So guess what? Rob gave her a job. And that's a pretty big deal considering he waited so long to get his dream job. I just want to stop to say the story hasn't even started yet. And it's about to, because things are going to get really crazy. Some of it is going to blow your mind. When you find out everything that's going on behind the scenes, you just wait. Shannon explains that Rob is a dedicated Christian. He has a very strong relationship with Christ. He's a mentor as well as her boss. It's kind of everything we've already talked about. So moving on, Shannon says that Brenda is a loving mother. She's sweet and quiet. She teaches Sunday school at church. Detectives are thinking, we're not going to get anywhere in this case, because they were hearing the same thing over and over again about Rob and Brenda, no matter who they interviewed. And there's hundreds of people at this church. But you just wait. If you're impatient to know more, just imagine how frustrating it was for detectives, because it's the same story every time. It's like it had almost been rehearsed. Maybe because they're Christians, they didn't want to talk poorly about other Christians. The detectives didn't know for sure. But when you find out, you will be sitting here scratching your head and saying, why didn't anyone do anything or say anything? Why did all this happen? Could it have been stopped? Because those were the things that I was thinking. You would think someone like Shannon, who had actually known Rob for 15 years, the one he gave a job to, would know more about his life. But Rob was private. You're going to find out there's only a handful of people that he really confided in. So what about Brenda? Well, when they were asking around the church, the investigators heard that Brenda liked to flirt with other women's husbands, and she would act a little too friendly toward men other than her husband. She would wear revealing outfits around the house while she had handymen there, or she even changed the color of her hair once because she learned that a guy she was flirting with loved redheads. This sounds more like town gossip than evidence of some kind, but this is what they're gathering at this point. However, the investigators were told they really need to look into what Brenda did in her spare time while Rob was at work. They're also informed that the elders actually asked Brenda to stop teaching Sunday school class. Why was that? They were going to have to meet with them to find out. Maybe it had to do with the next fact they learned about Brenda and Rob, that they didn't have a perfect marriage. They were separated. That's right. So how could this be possible? Because we keep hearing about the fact that they are a happy couple. Well, sometimes, especially when you are a Christian, you want to keep these things under wraps. Rob wasn't the one that wanted to get divorced. He didn't believe in divorce. He was absolutely in love with Brenda. But apparently, it wasn't the first time that they had been separated throughout their 17-year marriage. There were other times when they had to give each other a break. And ultimately, they would end up back together. Unfortunately, over the years, they were growing apart as individuals. They were both wonderful people to all of their friends and their family. Brenda was a supportive mother who would do anything for her children, and Rob was a devout Christian, helping his community and bringing people closer to the Lord. But that wasn't bringing his wife closer to him. Eventually, whether it was because Brenda had already lived that life growing up and she just wanted to be free, or because the relationship just naturally ran its course, the couple started to talk about separating, and it's hard. Their lives were so intertwined. They had a bunch of the same friends, a beautiful home where they were raising their young children. These situations are never easy. Rob, being the persistent person that he was, believed in never giving up. He would never give up on Brenda. He was always going to try to reconcile the relationship no matter what. But just like Rob had been confiding in his friends and family about his insecurities and his desire to be closer to Brenda, she had also been confiding in her friends and family about things that were going on in their relationship. And it turns out she thought that he was kind of an absent father, that he cared more about the church community and his work than being home with his children, that he was a workaholic, oppressive, overbearing, and she had had enough. There's always going to be multiple sides to a story and many different opinions. I guess that Brenda thought strongly enough about thinking the relationship could not work out. She refused to continue to try over and over again. It was true. Rob was traveling a lot for his job, and as a matter of fact, while the separation was brewing and their marriage seemed to be falling apart, the Twin Towers in New York City were falling to the ground. This was back in September of 2001. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 happened just days before Rob's 39th birthday, September 19th. He was stuck in California after the planes were grounded, and the entire United States was dealing with an absolute devastating catastrophe. Brenda wasn't exactly happy to see Rob when he returned. She was trying to keep her distance so that they could move on into the next step of their separation. However, she did play nicely because it was his birthday, and the families still got together. I told you it was going to be the last time they had an ordinary celebration as a family. However, the day afterward, it was time. She basically kicked Rob out of their home. But wait, because you need to hear everything. This case gets so twisted and convoluted and shocking, and I'm sure it's going to affect you as much as it did to me. By October 3rd, Brenda had filed for divorce, and even though he was served with the divorce papers, that wasn't going to stop him. He was going to lean into God and pray that his marriage could be healed. Friends and family expected this to be hard for the Andrew family, but they never expected them to go through what they now know happened to them. You never think anything like this is going to happen to the people close to you. Brenda and Rob were still there for their children. They came up with a plan that for the time being, Rob was going to get a nearby apartment. They both wanted to be supportive for their children, especially with the Thanksgiving holiday around the corner. They wanted things to remain as normal as possible. They were still both spending time with visiting their children and being involved in their everyday normal activities. But it wasn't really that different for Rob to be at his apartment because it wasn't around the children as much as Brenda was. She really was the parent in the household. The children were attached to her. She did everything for them. And divorce can be really messy. But sometimes it can be completely amicable. You're dealing with a Christian man and a woman who was raised with the same upbringing and values. But just because you're church-going people doesn't mean that people you associate with are good people. Somebody wanted to cause harm to the Andrew family. Somebody was concocting a plan. And the first clue that something wasn't right was back on October 26th. They find this out when they interview a woman that worked with Rob. Her name is Barb Mercer Green. Barb was Rob's coworker, friend, and confidant. She was like a second mother to him, since Rob was actually the age of her children. She tried to lend an ear, the voice of reason, and give him a shoulder to cry on if he needed one, and he needed one on October 26th. Rob comes into the office, and he's not his normal, cheerful, outgoing self, and Barb wants to know what is wrong. He doesn't hesitate. He lets her know that something bizarre just happened to him, and he's really freaked out. He walked to his car this morning, and he saw a pool of liquid underneath, which was concerning. So he drives his car to a nearby auto repair shop. The mechanic takes one look underneath the car, and his eyes get wide, and he's shocked. He shares his concern with Rob, and he says he thinks that someone has intentionally cut the brakes on his vehicle. So Rob is shaken up. He doesn't know what's going on. He gets a taxi and he goes into work and he tells Barb what happened. Now, there's a lot of things you don't know that Barb knows at this point. So I need to go back and explain some of those to you because they are vital to understanding why Barb was so concerned when Rob came in that day and he shared this news with her. First, I want to tell you about what happened when detectives interviewed the elders of the church. Well, they come to find out that Brenda was dressing inappropriately, but that's not why she got fired from her Sunday school position. It was actually because she was supposedly, possibly, allegedly, carrying on inappropriate behaviors with fellow churchgoers, specifically a Sunday school teacher, James Pavat. Apparently, the interactions were bad enough to where the elders fired both of them from the Sunday school. So who was this James Pavat person? Well, he was actually a friend of the Andrews family. He's a deacon in the church. He and Rob, they go on hunting trips together. They did business deals with one another. James's wife and family would hang out with the Andrew family. James is about 10 years his senior. He's 48 years old. So what's going on? Well, people have said that James and Brenda looked more like boyfriend and girlfriend than just friends. This was the accusation that was the breaking point for Brenda, and she filed divorce because the rumors about her were swirling forever and they just kept going. And finally, they got into Rob's head. Rob ends up confronting her and she says, "I've had enough. I am not doing anything inappropriate with this man, but I'm filing for divorce." The whispers actually started before this. James had filed for divorce earlier that summer, and that's when the people at the church started to assume he did that because he was obsessed with Brenda. They were seen acting, in the words of the women there at the church, like teenagers, giggling and passing notes around in church service, and the parents started to be uncomfortable sending their children to the Sunday school. So they both had to be terminated from their positions. This is when all of this is going to come together, but not really, because there's so many twists and turns. Once you find out exactly what's going on, it's still going to be bizarre. I had to know everything, every detail. I just had to find out. And investigators do too. They're speculating that possibly there was some kind of obsession going on here, that James was obsessed with Brenda, that the families had spent time together and somehow he became infatuated with her. And possibly she was very friendly with James. He thought that she wanted something that he did, but he possibly wanted more and she didn't want to give it to him, so he decided to hurt the family. James was pretty respected in the church community as well, but he was also feared because he was formerly in the Air Force and there were rumors that he was in the Special Forces. He would actually brag that he had killed people and that he's a really dangerous person. So maybe his past caught back up with him and maybe he's being a dangerous person once again. They have to know more, so this is where we left off with Barb. Rob's confidant at work. After Rob found out the rumors were swirling about James and Brenda, he kind of went off on her, which is what I told you finally led to her filing for divorce. I can't know for sure whether it was just Rob being paranoid when he walked in that day, knowing his brakes had been cut, but he told Barb he thought James was trying to kill him. Detectives had gotten in touch with James Pavat's ex-wife, Sakyung Pavat. James met her when he was in the Air Force in Southeast Asia. He was a military police officer, and they had been married for 9 years before their divorce in 2001. Investigators asked her what she could tell them about James. She said he's the kindest man that she'd ever met. He was so kind all throughout their marriage, but he said he wanted to get a divorce because she didn't get along with his family. However, as they got closer to getting the actual divorce, he said it was for her protection because of the problems with his previous duty in the Special Forces. He told her Korea was the only place that she would be safe in the whole world. She ended up moving back to Korea, but she returned because not long after the divorce, James called her and he said he made the biggest mistake in his life. But when she came back, she said the man that she had always known, he wasn't there anymore. It wasn't the same man that she knew for the past 9 years. Something wasn't right with him, and it was very concerning. They asked her where he was, and she said she didn't know. She said she's not even sure where he's living, but she does have his work address. He was currently working for Prudential Insurance Company, so they went there to talk to his supervisor, and that's when they find out from coworkers that he likes to impress people with his ability to kill. He seemed to have an obsession with trying to brag about how dangerous he was. So it's true. This is what we heard earlier, and it's corroborated. Not only that, and this is really disgusting to me personally as an animal lover, specifically a dog lover, but one of his coworkers said that James liked to shoot dogs, and that every time he would see a dog, he would talk about shooting it. And that's sad and disgusting and mean. Another coworker described him as creepy. At this point, he does shoot to the top of the list when it comes to potential suspects for detectives. They're going to track James down, but there's something more important happening. Rob's funeral. It was Monday, November 26th at Crossings Community Church at 10 a.m. All of Rob's closest friends and family were gathered together to say goodbye to a man that they loved and adored and who will be gone forever. It seemed like everyone had shown up, everyone from church, from Jordan, Rob's entire family, Brenda's entire family, their neighborhood friends. The entire place was packed. He had a huge group of clients that he worked with over the years, and everyone came to pay their respects. But the funeral kept being postponed. It wasn't starting. And finally, one of the ministers that were presiding over the funeral, he got up and he said, "We're not starting on time because some of the family members are not here." And this raised a red flag, and everybody's looking around trying to figure out, what family member would be missing? What family member would be late? 10 minutes go by, the funeral still hasn't started. Then 20 minutes go by. So many people wanted to say goodbye to Rob and to support Brenda and the children, but that's the thing. And this is so scary. As people were continuing to look around, they were not seeing Brenda or the children anywhere. And this is not like Brenda. This is out of character. They have no idea what's going on. Brenda had planned the funeral arrangements with her family and her neighbor, Judy. Everyone is immediately concerned. They don't want to jump to conclusions quite yet, so they wait. But after 45 minutes go by and they don't hear from Brenda, and after making multiple calls that are going straight to her voicemail, family members call the police and say, "You need to go over there and do a welfare check at the Andrew home." They're worried that something has happened to the children and Brenda. Maybe the criminals have come back to finish the job, and it's terrifying. While the funeral is going on, police go out there and they don't find anything out of the ordinary by walking around the perimeter of the home. They looked in the windows and they went back. They tell the family, "We didn't find anything." Because the funeral is going on, it's kind of hard for the family to stop what they're doing to try to figure out exactly what happened. They thought the police were going to take care of it. Well, when nothing was taken care of and the funeral is over, the family insists the police go back, and this time they say, "Take a key, go inside, find out what's going on." And inside, they find out that the minivan is gone. It had been parked in the garage just a day earlier, and now it's gone. So the police get a phone call, and it's Brenda's sister, Kim. And she says, "Listen, I just found out Brenda and the kids are fine. I'm going to go track them down, and I'll have them call you." However, after some time goes by and the police do not hear from her, they call Kim back. And she said, "You know what? I'm really sorry. I was wrong. I had bad information. I don't know where Brenda is." Wow. How can you make that mistake? But it happened. I guess they were literally playing telephone. but it's only going to get worse. This is when police reach out once again to James' supervisor, and they find out James hasn't been to work in a week. At this point, they feel like they're in a race against time. This man is clearly dangerous, and sure enough, just a few hours later, police find James's pickup truck near Southwest 122 and Penn Avenue, right here on the map. I'm going to show it to you. This is only 13 minutes away from the Andrew residence, and it's abandoned on the side of the road. There's something worse. It's something they find out that makes them very fearful for the safety of these children. Someone comes forward and they say they were a witness to a notarized document presented by James Pavat that was supposedly signed by Robert Andrew, allowing his daughter Tricity and son Parker to leave the country. This document was used by James to have travel visas issued for Brenda and Rob's children. This man is trying to take these two poor little children out of the country. They just lost their father, and their mother had almost been killed. And this to me is crazy. I would be out of my mind. So authorities issue an all points bulletin for Brenda and the children because they're starting to think that James killed Rob, possibly now Brenda, and plans to hurt the children. From all the reports they got, it seems like James has been gone for about a day, but Brenda may have been gone longer because the neighbor Dean comes forward and says that he tried to call Brenda the night before around 7 p.m. and didn't get an answer. He called back at 8 and still didn't hear back from her. At this point, no one is sure who spoke to Brenda last and whether her and the children are safe. As investigators are digging deeper, they look into Brenda and James' bank accounts, and they find out that Brenda has recently transferred money out of an account that she shared with Rob, her deceased husband. And this isn't necessarily anything to be too suspicious about, but for all they know, she could have been forced to do so. That's what they were thinking until friends start coming forward with more information. And one of those friends was Barb. Remember her? That was Rob's confidant that he had known for a number of years. Well, over the years, Barb had been there to listen to a lot of stories about Brenda. And these stories came from Rob, so they're only one-sided. But nevertheless, she told investigators that there was a night where the family was eating spaghetti dinner, and Brenda was getting annoyed. She told Rob she hated the way that he ate food, and she proceeded to dump a plate of pasta into his lap. But not only that, according to Rob, Brenda had always hated things about him. On their wedding night, she told him she thought that the marriage was a mistake and that she hated him. This is what was said. If all of this is true, why was Rob still with Brenda? And what was the context? It's not as though either one of these people were forced to marry each other from what I read, but Barb insists that from the day they were married forward, Brenda has never been faithful to Rob, and James is just one of many of her affairs. Barb says, you know who you need to talk to? Ron Stump. He was Rob's best friend. He's the guy who Brenda was flirting with once, her husband's own best friend. He's the one that liked redheads, and immediately the next time he saw her, she had red hair. The floodgates are about to open. Ronnie Stump is the man who's known Rob the longest. It's his very best friend. He spends a lot of time with Rob. What I heard from this interview made me really sad. It started to make me think about whether I actually know any of the people in my life the way I think I do. Investigators track Ron down for questioning. It was basically the case of how far back do you want me to go? Because clearly he was about to tell them a lot of information about Brenda and his best friend Rob. And it made me sad, like I said, because he explained what they already heard before, that Brenda didn't seem to love Rob the way that Rob loved Brenda. It always seemed one-sided. Ron tells investigators they need to track down Rob's journal, his prayer journal, because not only does he write scripture in there, he writes everything about his life in his journals. They need to look at them because if they do, they're going to find out everything that Ron is going to tell them. And they're going to be able to corroborate all the stories, starting with the fact that before they got married, when they were engaged, Rob decided to surprise Brenda when she was at college in Kansas. And when he drives up to the campus and he asks where she is, because she's not in her own dorm room, he's directed to the dorm room of Brenda's ex-boyfriend. That's right. She was staying in her ex-boyfriend's dorm room the night before, and it's clear that she wasn't being faithful to Rob even back then. He did confide in his dad about the situation and others, and he explained it away, saying that maybe it was just something innocent, but deep down he knew. But he just loved her so much that he let it slide. But it's also true that on their wedding night, not only did she say that it was a mistake, she really did say that she hated him. This marriage was a disaster from the beginning, and Ron and others couldn't understand why Rob wouldn't see things their way. It's like he just wanted it to work so badly, and he thought that he would be able to change her. But it only got worse. Even when Ron would say something like, "Rob, wake up. See what's going on around you." The people who loved Rob were only trying to help. But Rob, he had that persistent attitude. That was part of his DNA. He never wanted to give up. Ron told investigators he knew for sure there were 2 affairs that Brenda definitely engaged in. One of them happened in 1997. So back when Brenda was working at the bank, she met a friend there. And that friend had a husband, Rick Nunley. So Rick and his wife would hang out with Brenda and Rob, go on double dates, have fun as a couple, and they would hang out and get to know each other more and more. Well, Brenda started to confide in Rick about some of the issues that she was having in her marriage, and Rick confided in Brenda about some of his. So over the years, they become closer, just sharing things about their marriages that they were concerned about or that they didn't like about their partners. Eventually, Rick files for divorce in October of 1997. When investigators asked him his thoughts on Brenda, he said she was very hospitable, she was intelligent, she loved her children, she was a good cook and a nice person. But that nice person ends up finding out he filed for divorce and starting to come on to him. And it takes 2 to tango, but eventually they end up having a sexual relationship. And this relationship went on for months, until the spring of 1998, when it just finally fizzled out. However, Brenda and Rick remained really good friends. They would call each other regularly and talk about everything in their lives. They would also meet in person, but Rick says at this point he swears that they were strictly platonic. They were just friends. However, Brenda's still sharing information and confiding in him about what's going on between her and Rob. She expressed many times that she didn't want to be with him anymore. The investigators are pressing Ron more and more for information. They ask him, has she ever talked about wanting to hurt her husband? He says, no, nothing like that, nothing of that nature. He said she never gave me any impression that she would hurt Rob in any way. Cell phone records indicated there were 87 calls between Brenda and Rick during the months of September, October, and November 2001. If we only knew exactly what those phone calls were about. The next affair that Ron tells investigators about was with a guy named James Higgins, who was also married. And this happened in 1999. As I'm explaining this to you, I'm telling you what Ron is saying to investigators, and then I'm telling you what the people they investigated are saying back to the investigators, if that makes sense. So when they did question Mr. Higgins, they said, "Where did you meet Brenda?" He said he was working at the grocery store and she came in and she started flirting and being really friendly. So they asked, well, what do you mean by flirting? Higgins said, well, she came in. She was dressed in really sexy outfits, short dresses, tops that had the cleavage showing, and she would just come on to him until he finally reacted to it. Married man, married woman. They end up getting together. He said it was in March of 1999. She came into the grocery store and she said, stick out your hand. So he does. And she puts something in his hand, closes it up. And when he opens it, it's a key to a motel room. And she said, meet me there when you get off work. So what did Higgins do? Well, he did just that. Investigators asked him, well, who paid for the hotels? And he said Brenda did. They continued to have this sexual relationship for over a year. And most of the time they would meet up at the motels, hotels. Sometimes they would have sex in her car. And other times they would literally have sex in the Andrew home. And that is disgusting. Now, this particular affair continued until May of 2001. So just before the summer, like right before Rob is found murdered. Why did it end? Well, Brenda told Higgins it wasn't fun anymore. So running around behind her husband's back, it just wasn't fun anymore. However, just like she liked to keep around her last lover, Rick, she kept Higgins around as well. And not only that, he sort of became a friend of the family. She introduced this man to her children and her husband. And eventually, Brenda hired Higgins to do renovations on the Andrews home, including the brand new paint job that they just had done. And the neighbors had even commented that the paint wasn't even dry before Robert was killed. It's just an expression. Clearly it was dry. Higgins also tells them that even though they were still friends and he was helping with renovations at the home, he got upset when she started coming on to his sons. I don't know how old his sons are, but the fact is they were over there helping him, so they're probably at least teenagers, hopefully, but this is what was said. Brenda couldn't wait to get Robert out of her life. But does this mean that she killed Rob? Because some think it's more of the fact that she let men into her life who would continue to want these relationships even when Brenda doesn't think it's fun anymore. Someone like James. Because according to Ron, James and Brenda were definitely having an affair. Ron tells investigators some things we already knew, that James used to be in the military. He recently got a divorce, but this affair started well before that, probably right after she got done with Higgins. Because James and Brenda took a trip together with the children. They went to Texas. And remember how much Brenda loved Texas? And I guess she was mad that Rob made her leave. And maybe she planned on having a new life with her secret lover and her children back in Texas. However, to be fair, this was after Rob and Brenda had separated. I guess she was free to date whoever she wanted and be with whoever she wanted. She was an adult after all, and they were getting a divorce. Her intention was to leave Rob. And it was like once those divorce papers were put into motion, that's when shit started to hit the fan. Ron mentions the brake lines, and we already know. We've heard this from Barb. But Ron goes on further to say, Rob called the police about this. He filed a report. You should have that information. So of course, investigators, they're right on it. They want to pull up that information to see if there's anything there that's relevant to this case. Rob Andrew had filed a report with the Oklahoma City Police. He gave them details that he was suspicious that James Pavat had cut his brake lines and that he was trying to kill him by getting him to get on the highway so he would get into an accident. Why? Because guess what? When he was at work that day, he got a phone call. And it was a strange woman on the other line. It wasn't Brenda. And she said, "Is this Mr. Andrew?" He's like, "Yes." She said, "Oh my God, hurry. Come quick. Your wife and your kids, they got in an accident. They've been rushed to Norman Hospital. Get here as fast as you can." That hospital is 40 minutes away. It is not a local hospital. He would have had to get on the highway to get there, and he knew this. So he thought it was weird. It didn't sound right. Something was off. His brakes were cut, and now he's getting a phone call. It's like the oldest trick in the book. So he tells police, "Someone is trying to kill me, and I think I know who it is." At this point, he also tells police his friend James, the one he's suspecting, might be having a relationship with his wife. So at this point, Ron is explaining that Rob decides to look into his life insurance policy. Sounds like something that you would do, right? If you thought someone was trying to kill you, especially because his wife is the beneficiary. But what was even more unbelievable was that James Pavat was the one who wrote the insurance policy because he is an insurance agent at Prudential Life Insurance. Months before this, Rob and James are friends. They go on hunting trips together. They're both deacons in the church. They do business together. And one of the businesses is this life insurance policy, an $800,000 life insurance policy with Brenda as a beneficiary. Rob contacts James, and he kind of confronts him. He says, "Listen, I need to change the beneficiary on my policy to my children." And for whatever reason, James is trying to convince Rob that he can't change it because he doesn't own the policy. And this is all happening right before the Andrews divorce hearing that was supposed to be scheduled for November 1st. What's even more interesting is that James Pavat was actually subpoenaed to testify at that hearing. But guess what? November 1st rolls around and he's nowhere to be found. So he's held in contempt of court. It was at this divorce hearing that Rob tells the judge he wants his life insurance beneficiary to be changed from Brenda to his children. The judge puts in an order and has it changed. Those new changes were in effect. The beneficiary was the children, and one of Rob's brothers was the trustee. So as they're talking to Ron, they're also doing research. The investigators are out there immediately going to track down all these documents, talking to people, gathering more information to make sense of everything that's going on. And investigators find out when they call the insurance company that the day after the divorce hearing, Brenda calls. She wants to know if she's still the beneficiary on Rob's insurance policy, and guess what they tell her? Well, you are now, again, because the document had just been faxed. That's right. The document had just been faxed in and backdated to March, and it contained what looked like Rob's signature. Interestingly enough, when he was at that divorce hearing and the judge says, "What do you and Brenda argue about?" He said the only arguments he has ever had with Brenda was about trying to remove her from the insurance policy. So this is what made him believe that James and Brenda were conspiring to kill him by cutting his brake lines. That's why, the day after the hearing, he files a more explicit report with the police saying, "Listen, they're conspiring to kill me to claim my $800,000 life insurance policy, and still the police do nothing." This man knew. He knew, and nothing was done. This man was so scared that on November 19th, a day before he was murdered, he provides the police with a cassette tape that contains 2 suspicious calls, urging him to rush to Norman Hospital. After the call that we know about with the weird woman, he gets another call from a man saying the exact same thing. So at this point, of course, Rob is thinking someone's trying to kill me. Not only that, the investigators dig up the 911 call. You hear him literally telling this 911 dispatcher, "That sounds like attempted murder, don't you think?" Rob is solving his murder from the grave. Meanwhile, they also come across journal entries. And this was sad. The ones from the weeks prior to his death were all about how much pain he was going through and how he was trying to cope with the loss of the wife that he loved. One of the passages said, "I'm in great pain." It was on November 14th. "Jesus will intercede for me and will allow right things to occur for me. I don't need to fear failure or have guilt in me. I realize that God is for us. Who can be against us? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." I try not to get emotional because this next part was hard for me because it connects to what's going to happen later. And when I put it all together, I just couldn't believe how painful this was. But on November 19th, the evening before Rob is killed, he was with Ron and they're at Rob's apartment. And around 9:15 p.m., Rob's daughter, Tricity, calls. And she asks her dad to come home to see her new puppy. This little girl has been waiting for a puppy for so long. She's always dreamed of becoming a vet. And this was possibly either an early Christmas present or an early birthday present since her birthday is near Christmas. But all she wanted that night was to share that happy moment in her life with her daddy. So Rob and Ron drive over to Brenda's house. And when they get there, she's pissed. She didn't want Rob to have a friend over. And why was that? Was something already planned that night? And they're using his own daughter to lure him into the house? Well, it didn't work because Ron was with him and Brenda refused to let him inside to see the puppy. But here's the sad part. As they're leaving, Rob said something to Ron, and it honestly it gives me the chills and it makes me sick. He said, "It feels like someone has a gun on me all the time. If they do shoot me, I hope they get me with the first shot. I don't want to feel any pain." And that same night, Brenda talked to a friend who came forward, and she literally told that friend that she hated Rob. She said, "I hate him. I hate him." Oh, there's more. Ron suggests that Rob was shot with his own weapon, that he owned a 16-gauge shotgun. The more uncommon gauge shotgun, that's right. He told Ron that he tried to retrieve his shotgun from their home when he was kicked out by Brenda, but she wouldn't give it back to him. There wasn't a shotgun ever recovered anywhere. Brenda had changed the locks and she changed the security codes so that Rob couldn't get back into the house. Just a week before the murders occurred, Rob told Ron how Brenda refused to let him get in that house specifically to retrieve the shotgun. And they know that shotgun was in the house. You know why? Because when they were interviewing Higgins, he was doing repairs on the home. He saw the shotgun September 2001. It was in the bedroom closet. This is more than a coincidence. But what's worse is that when all of this was going down, Rob made a statement to Ron. He said, well, she finally found someone to kill me. He was saying that about James. And when James was asked what he was doing the day of the murders, he said he was moving his washer and dryer. And they find out that that washer and dryer was moved into Brenda's house. Yep. Just another piece of the puzzle. So with all this information, it is obvious to everyone that James probably didn't kidnap the kids and he probably didn't hurt Brenda. In fact, they're almost 100% certain Brenda and James are fugitives and they're on the run. The last thing that Rob ever said to anyone that we know of besides Brenda the night he was killed was when he left a message on Ron's answer machine around 5:45 p.m. He said that he was on his way to pick up his kids for the long holiday weekend and that he was excited and he was heading over to Brenda's. He was planning to get the children together with his family for the holiday traditions. That was his intention when he went to the home that he used to share with his wife and children that evening. He called Ron again around 6 p.m. At this time, he was sitting outside of Brenda's in his car waiting to pick up the children. Ron and Rob talked for a little while until Rob said to him, I'm going to have to let you go now. They're coming out. And that was sad to me. It was extremely heartbreaking to know that he's there to pick up his children that he will never see again, that he'll never get to say goodbye to. This was all detectives needed to know. The FBI gets involved and they literally put out wanted posters. These posters have descriptions of Brenda, James, and the two children. They were on America's Most Wanted. They were all over the place. There were a bunch of TV programs asking for the public's help, and they were believed to be armed and dangerous. They're going back and looking over all the evidence again, everything that they collected, and now they have a new theory. Rob was definitely shot with a 16-gauge shotgun, but conveniently, Brenda wasn't. Because I don't know if you know this, but it's going to leave more than a through-and-through wound that's going to be bandaged up and let you be on your way the same night. That is why police believe the .22 caliber was used on Brenda instead of the shotgun. That was done on purpose. They also found the gunpowder on her pink sweater was in the shape of a ring and it had residue around the bullet hole. That meant it was fired about 2 inches away from Brenda. So she wasn't running away from a perpetrator. They think she was holding her arm out and turning away and just letting her new boyfriend give her a little love tap compared to what her husband Rob suffered that night. And not only that, when they started looking at everything else, they find Brenda's clothing from that night. When they test the jeans, they find her blood, which they knew would be there, but they also find Rob's. And that makes sense, right? They were both in the garage together. But the thing is, Rob's blood was deep within the fabric. This meant that this was a high velocity. It means that she was standing very close to Rob. They believe Brenda herself was responsible for at least one of the wounds to her husband. Because of where everything took place, right near the furnace, and Brenda had already admitted that she was trying to get Rob to help her light the pilot light, they theorize that that is how she got him into the garage, under the pretense that, hey, we're cold. We need the pilot light lit. It went out again. And because Rob is the person he is, he still loves his wife more than anything. He was hoping that they would still be able to get back together, because that's another journal entry that I'm going to read you. But this man went in to help. And this is how she repaid him. Now for a huge break in the case. Someone tried to use a debit card or a credit card belonging to James Pavatt at an ATM in Mexico. And that is not good news. Now investigators know they truly have fugitives on their hands. Now this part of Mexico is called Nuevo Laredo, and it's right next to Laredo, Texas, which is the largest entry point into Mexico. And remember that the couple, James and Brenda, they took a trip to Texas not too long ago. So maybe this is where the plan came in. Instead of their little vacation, they were planning a murder. This is a place where thousands of people cross the border every single day. Up to 18,000 trucks pass over the border every single day. And they enter Mexico without being scanned. They only get scanned when they come back into the US. That is when the license plate gets scanned. Now I know this sounds crazy, but all of this is happening the same day. It's unreal. The investigators were working through all of that overtime to track down any clues because there were children involved who may never see their family again. Because now they're in another country. They issue a search warrant and they're able to go into James's apartment and they find a name change document, a black book containing a list of weapons, ammunition, and 2 .22 caliber bullets. Not only that, they find out that a week before the murder, James purchased a .22 caliber handgun from a local gun store. The evidence is just mounting and mounting. And on November 29th, James Pavatt and Brenda Andrew are charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. This also put a couple other things in motion. This is when Rob's parents, ER and Llewellyn, file for guardianship over the children. But you know who else wants guardianship? Brenda's sister Kim and her husband Jim. She's been very vocal that her sister has nothing to do with this, that Brenda would never put her children in harm's way. That James probably did this on his own, that Brenda is probably scared, but she's not involved. And Kim is pleading to the public to wait. You have to know there are two sides to every story. The fact that Brenda has been charged with murder freezes her bank account. So remember that money that she initially transferred from Rob's account into her account? Well, she no longer has access to that. The FBI also make it illegal for Brenda and James and the children to fly anywhere. So they're stuck where they are. They're going to run out of money at some point, and that's when they're probably going to come right back to the United States. That is what the FBI are hoping for. Unfortunately, by December 21st, nothing has changed. That's when the FBI issued a $15,000 reward for any information leading to their arrests. ER and Llewellyn are beside themselves. They want their grandchildren to be safe. They're making public pleas and statements saying, please, please return the children safely. Finally, someone comes forward with information. Nobody was expecting this. A woman calls in to investigators and she says she thinks she needs to make a confession, and she also knows who killed Rob. They say, how? Who is she? She was the person who made the phone call to Rob about his wife and children being hurt in a terrible accident and to rush to the hospital. That was her. She said her dad made her call Rob and say those things. So who is this woman? Turns out she's the adult daughter of James Pavatt, Jana Larson. She says, I swear I wasn't aware of what my dad was trying to do, because she realizes that she could be facing attempted murder charges. She promises that she had nothing to do with it and did not know her dad was involved in cutting brake lines. She can't believe that her father would put her own life in danger, that she would possibly go to prison on account of something he was about to do. Something that was so awful and heinous and illegal. And now that she realizes that this was his motive, she's willing to do anything to help the FBI. She gives them other information that was very damning and interesting. She says that James asked to borrow her car the day of the murders, and he says, oh, I'm going to go get your car serviced. How nice. But when he returns the car, it wasn't serviced. And when she got inside, she noticed something on the floor, a .22 caliber bullet. She confronted James about this, and her dad says, never repeat what I told you in October. So what was that? He came home one day and he said, "You're never going to believe what that nuttier than a fruitcake woman asked me to do. She asked me to kill her husband or find somebody that could." Wow. He reminded her at that point, "Don't say anything or I'll kill you too." And then he told her to throw away the .22 caliber bullet. So when she realizes what her dad was really up to, she tells the FBI. And she says that she's already been in contact with her father, that he's called her a couple of times. And he's running out of money like they thought. So they come up with a plan. They said, "We're going to tap your phone, and when he calls you next time, we're going to try to see if you can get him to meet you in Oklahoma so he'll come over the border to get the money." Well, a couple weeks later, it happens. He calls her up, and he says he needs some money. But when she says to come over to Oklahoma, he's not quite having it. And it doesn't really work out. However, they do have him on tape talking to her, and they confirm that he's definitely in Mexico. But sadly, they're still on the run. And they probably would be for a very long time because they had a plan in place. They thought they had everything planned out perfectly, that no one would ever know what they did. But all of that changed February 28th, 2002 at 11:55 a.m. For more than 3 months, Tricity and Parker have been gone. They weren't able to grieve for their father. They missed his funeral. They were never able to say goodbye to him. But because of one special agent at the Mexican-Texas border that paid attention to detail, the most incredible thing happened. And I was crying tears of happiness when I was reading this. And it was something the shows never fully explained and gave credit to this person for. It was something I had to read about when I was going through newspapers. Sergeant Special Agent Martin Huerta had actually been activated by the National Guard's Counter-Drug Task Force. He was stationed at the international bridge that links Mexico to Texas, and he was undercover. He wasn't just a Border Patrol agent. Everyone thought he was, but he was actually there to do secondary searches of vehicles in question that had been targeted by the Border Patrol officers, and they were supposed to be given a second inspection that was more thorough. Everyone else thought he was just a normal customs agent. Every single hour, he goes through about 10 vehicles that could be suspected of carrying drugs across the border, and it is a very tedious job. Sometimes you see so many vehicles that they all start to just blend together, but somehow that day, something stood out. Around 11:40, Martin spotted something that stood out. He saw a little girl, and she was crying, and her eyes were red, and it looked like she'd been crying for a very long time. This is something that's so important to his job, to make sure that these children aren't being trafficked or kidnapped. So Martin looked over and he sees a little boy, and the little boy's also crying. And then when he looks over at who's driving this minivan, it was a fairly older gentleman. It didn't seem to be the children's father, so he stops the car and searches their bags. Inside the little girl's bag, he finds a diary. And inside are all kinds of hand-drawn pictures of dogs. It's pretty obvious that she loved doggies. There were dogs on every page in that book, but she just kept crying. And he wanted her to stop crying and to cheer her up. So he asked her, "Do you like dogs?" And she just nodded her head, yeah. So he had an idea. There are these little trading cards that the customs officials always have on hand in case they need to talk to children, so they can kind of entertain them, distract them. There's some heavy things that go on at these borders. But some of the cards have Border Patrol dogs on them. And the cards talk about the dog's history and the dog's career. And he thought, I'm going to hand her some of these cards to cheer her up. So he went over and he said, "You want to see some dogs?" And he starts showing her the cards with the dogs on it. And she burst into tears once again. She was like fully bawling her eyes out. But there wasn't anything suspicious about the man driving or the vehicle. Nothing that could lead Martin to believe anything was out of sorts. So they went on their way. But little did he know that that chance encounter was going to change those children's lives forever. Because he just encountered Tricity and Parker Andrew with their uncle Jim Bolin, Brenda's sister's husband. He just didn't know it yet. But 20 minutes later, after the minivan was gone, remember the tag reader I talked about? Well, they registered a hit. It hit on an Oklahoma license plate, and the customs agents confirmed that the occupants inside were wanted by the FBI. a beautiful black-haired woman in her 30s, and a slender man in a blue shirt wearing sunglasses. They didn't even resist arrest. Brenda Andrew and James Pavat were finally captured. After they were detained, Martin was called over by his supervisor to get the things out of the vehicle. When he picked up Brenda's purse, the zipper broke and things fell out into the floor. And when they did, the purse opened up and he could see other compartments. When he looked inside, he saw a picture and he recognized the little girl. He had just seen her in that minivan 20 minutes earlier, and he's frantically rushing around to find that vehicle. He knew it was a Ford minivan, but he couldn't remember the color. All of a sudden, as he's rushing around, he sees the back of the van, and it's parked near the entrance of the immigration office. At this point, they've connected that those are Brenda's children. So they go inside, and they're calling out their names, and as soon as those children turn around and respond, they run up and they detain Jim Boland. For the next 3 hours, Martin is in there with these children, and they're crying nonstop. Nothing can stop them from bawling their eyes out. They give them cookies and drinks and games, but nothing helped. All they wanted was to see their mom. But by 4:30, the FBI had finally taken Brenda and James into custody. They were in jail in Texas, and the children were waiting for their grandparents, ER and Llewellyn, and it was sad. These grandparents, they did so much to prepare. They set up rooms in anticipation that they were going to be found and they would get them back, and they love them so much. It's the only piece of their son they have left. They're just amazing people. I want to tell you a little more because I was able to find out some current and recent information about the children, and I wanted to share it. But before I do, I just want to tell you one thing that Special Agent Martin said, that he was proud to be someone who played a role in finding the children, but he was haunted by something that he saw in that diary. When he was going through it, he saw that Tricity had written something to her best friend. It was about her new puppy. The entry was from back in November. He can't exactly remember what she said, but it was before her father was killed. She never wrote in that journal again. That was her last entry, and it's hard for me not to become emotional about that. It's like her world ended for her at that point. She had nothing to write about. Both Brenda and James waived extradition and were back in Oklahoma within 10 days of being detained. District Attorney Wes Lane decided to seek the death penalty against both of them. And I wanted to know what you thought about this part, because it's actually pretty controversial. I want to know about everything that I've told you about, but what are your thoughts specifically about the death penalty being on the table in this case? The police released photographs of the severed brake lines, even the tape of the phone calls. So all this is going out to the media, and they're gearing up for trials. Brenda denies she has any involvement. She pleads not guilty, and James does as well. They're both denied bail. And you know what else comes out? Remember how the children were with Jim Boland, Kim's husband, Brenda's sister's husband? Well, guess what? The prosecutors say Kim was waiting in a motel room in McAllen, Texas, for them to all arrive. So they think they might have had something to do with helping Brenda get away with this. Can you remember back to when Kim also made that phone call to police and she's like, oh, don't worry, Brenda's fine. And she's like, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. Never mind. I don't know where she is. Kind of sketchy. I'm not going to go into details about this trial because it is just long and crazy, and there's so many things that came out. Like the fact that years before this, Judy had given Brenda a key to her house and she'd forgotten about it. So they think that Brenda gave that key to James, and James used it to get into that house to hide after committing the crime. So many people testified. That's where I got a lot of this information, because I read through all of the trial documents. The men that she had affairs with were at the trial testifying, family members, friends, coworkers, the list goes on and on. There were 2 separate trials. There was James, that happened 1 year before Brenda's. His was a 3-week trial. They reached a verdict, murder in the first degree with a fixed punishment of death. Brenda's trial was highly publicized. It garnered national media attention, mostly because statistically it's men who commit these kind of crimes, and Brenda was a woman. So it was kind of a big deal. Not only that, media Well, they saw this as a really good story because it was love and religion and sex and lies. It was like a Lifetime movie or something. They had handwriting experts for all kinds of things. And guess what? Remember the insurance documents that were faxed over and then backdated to March? Well, Brenda would always brag to her friends for some reason that she could sign Rob's signature just as good as he could and that she would sign documents for him all the time for work. However, he started using a little symbol. I'll show it to you on the screen. It's a little symbol for a fish. It's a Christian symbol. He started putting this right under his signature. Well, when they analyzed the insurance documents, it was missing. So those documents were forged. The prosecution believes Brenda did this for money and because she didn't want to lose custody of her children. After a 6-week trial, Brenda was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and she was also sentenced to death. She's currently awaiting execution on death row. However, I did want to add, there is some controversy here. And it's the last thing I'm going to mention right before I tell you something about Tricity. This case was sexual in nature. And I say that because a lot of the evidence that the prosecution submitted was about Brenda's character, not evidence of her being there when this crime was committed. Yes, they had some of that as well. But what they had more of was evidence of her affairs. As a matter of fact, there is an article I read called Sex Shamed to Death, where they think that Brenda got the death penalty because she was a promiscuous woman, for a better word. The prosecution's closing arguments were interesting, to say the least. They brought a luggage out that she had brought to Mexico, and they opened it up. And one by one, they're pulling out pairs of thong underwear. And they're saying, does this look like the underwear of a grieving wife? Does this look like the underwear of a woman who loved her husband and wouldn't have an affair with one of his best friends? Like, just going through it like this and this. And lingerie and whatever else was in there. The point of this was kind of for shock value and to make her look like a terrible woman, a terrible wife, that she didn't care about Rob whatsoever. But it was also argued that it had nothing to do with the fact that she was on trial for murder. Yes, she could be promiscuous and a cheater, but does it make her a murderer? When Brenda made her appeal, those were the things that were in there. That's evidence to prove maybe she wasn't a Christian woman, but it's not really supposed to be evidence to prove you committed murder. By the way, James isn't on death row. He had his death sentence commuted. That's right. When he appealed, his sentence was reduced to life in prison. He alleged he didn't have a fair trial because there was a person who confessed to shooting Rob, Tyrone Wood. There was a letter that Tyrone sent in, and it was never introduced to evidence. So I'm not going to go into it all, but because of the way his counsel did or did not submit certain things, his sentence was commuted to life. In 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Brenda's appeal, and last time I checked, there were only 42 people awaiting death in Oklahoma right now, and Brenda was the only woman that I was able to find. Now, I told you I wanted to end with something positive. Tricity has grown into an amazing woman. After graduating high school, she attended University of Tulsa in 2009, and she graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics with a minor in biology and business administration. She went on to achieve her master's degree in applied mathematics from North Carolina State University, and then she graduated June 2020 with her PhD in applied mathematics. That's freaking amazing. She was active in the Association for Women in Mathematics, and she held roles as president, vice president, and treasurer. So Rob, I think you got your wish. I'm sure somehow, somewhere, there was a button or a sticker or a sign that said electricity. Even though her father couldn't be there in the flesh, he was there walking down the aisle with her because a picture of him and her together was tied to the bouquet. I spent hours looking through her Facebook. I feel like I got to know this family, and I have so much respect for Rob's parents. They're still together. They have raised wonderful children, and I just want to thank all of you so much for watching this video and giving your time to this family. It really means a lot to me. So thank you so very much for watching. I will see you in my next video.